Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before we commence with this public hearing, I just want to say a couple of administrative announcements. If anybody's going to testify, you can sign in there. And also, if you have a written statement, you can leave it with my staff over there. And at the end, I will give you the address where my office is at and other stuff. And those that are testifying, you can come up front. And also, before I start, I want to recognize the former First Lady of Guam, Joanne Camacho. Thank you for your participation today. Ladies and gentlemen, buenas and hafadai todos samjo. The Committee on Public Safety, Border Safety, Military and Veterans Affairs, Marriage Council, Infrastructure and Public Transit is hereby called to order. The time now is 5 or 6 after 3 p.m. The committee will hear testimony on Bill number 8635 COR and Act to add 61547, both to Article 5, Chapter 61, Title 21, Guam Code annotated relative to exterior on-premise signage in hotel resort zones and defining digital signage introduced by our speaker, Tina Munoz-Barnes. For the records and in accordance with Section 8107, Chapter 8, 5 GCA, the first public hearing notice was sent out Monday, May 28, 2019, and also adhering to the 5 working days notice. It was sent out 48 hours before. It was sent out Sunday, May 18, 2019. And in addition to this public hearing was noticed to the Guam Legislature website. Joining here with me today are my colleagues. To my left, Senator Taitano, Senator Biscoli, our speaker, my favorite, Speaker Tina Munoz-Barnes, and to my immediate right, Terlaje, and Senator Terlaje. Thank you and good afternoon. Before we start, ladies and gentlemen, let me just give the opportunity for the speaker to make her opening remarks.
Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak and open for Bill number 86-35. I introduced Bill number 86-35 at the request of some community stakeholders. It was brought to my attention that our zoning laws regarding on-premise signs on the H Resort Zone property was not clear. Section 3319 of 18 GAR states that the nature, the size, the shape, the lighting, and style of an outdoor sign shall conform to those requirements as outlined in the sign regulations of sub-article 5 of Chapter 61, Title 21. While the sub-article lists requirements for residential, commercial, and industrial zoned property, H Resort has no specific requirements. Absent any direct provisions on signage on H Resort Zones property, developers and property owners are unsure about how they advertise what is in their building or property. Additionally, Mr. Chair, development in H Resort is not strictly for hotels. Some of the permitted uses include the cultural and recreational facilities, hotels, restaurants, tourism-related shops and offices, dwellings, parks, marinas, zoos, amusement activities, and supportive services. These are commercial business that should be able to advertise what is on their property. I want to share with you, Mr. Chair and colleagues, that hotels around the world are no longer just a place for visitors to sleep in. They are quickly adapting to the trends in the industry and becoming destinations in itself, many incorporating aquariums, large shopping malls, amusement parks, healthcare facilities, and sometimes transportation hubs on the same property. Our zoning law should reflect these shifts in the hospitality industry and update signage regulations of H-zoned resort. Additionally, the bill further defines digital signage according to the standards issued by the U.S. State Signs Council. It's clear that digital signage is already an important medium for advertising. We should solidify by statute what is acceptable for all digital signs on our island. So with that being said, I want to take this time to thank some of the stakeholders involved in this process and hope that this can be expeditiously moved forward by the committee, Mr. Chair. And I just want to note for the record that one of our colleagues, Senator Marsh Taitano, has a scheduled 3:15 appointment, and I'm hoping, thank you for the opportunity to letting her yield before we have our panel members speak, so that she can say her comments and her questions and then proceed to her scheduled event.
Go ahead, Senator Taitano.
Hafiday, and it's very good to see all of you here. And I appreciate the time and attention that you've given to this bill and this issue, and taking that additional time to come down here and testify in regards to it. So what I'm aiming to do is trying to find ways to strengthen it in certain ways, have it meet the needs that you're looking for, and that are serving our community well. So there were just a number of concerns that I had, or recommendations that I have. And so I want to mention these because I think they're important to get on the record, important for us all to think about, and then think how we can move forward with them. So I understand the intent of wanting to allow our commercial businesses to draw in locals and visitors alike, to make their establishments more engaging in different ways, and so forth. There were some things that stood out to me as I went through the bill. So the bill, as it's written, has great potential to forever change the character of our areas that service tourists the most. And so I just am encouraging all of us to think really carefully before making these changes. A change of this magnitude, I've driven through Tumon so many times, just thinking about how the character would change if all of the elements of this bill were put into place. And you know, I don't know that I've thought about it in the exact way that it would occur, but you know, I tried to put on that hat and think about the pros, the cons, things that we can tighten up, things that we can strengthen for all of this. And so I would say that to be responsible in this course of action, we really need to hear from the tourists, to have a survey, to understand their perspectives on our island destination. So while we might be thinking from a business perspective, we'd also definitely want to be speaking into what the tourists are actually coming here for. So, for example, if in their mind and the reason that they're coming here is to visit an island getaway, to get away from the city or urban life, that may hold specific types of expectations for them. They may be looking to get away from the bright lights of the city and the urban landscape to an area that has welcoming people, a beautiful environment, and charming or quaint atmosphere. If any digital signs are allowed, they have the potential to greatly alter our entire feel as a destination. I have some recommendations. So to conduct that study, to really understand what tourists are expecting and what they think would make our destination better and more attractive, or what might just alter it to a point that they wouldn't find it so charming. I don't know what that is, but I think a survey will help tell us. Perhaps a survey for 3 months could provide us that kind of data so that it's a deep database of information. I would recommend that we have some on-the-ground professional analysis about these types of signs. The buildings in Tumon, they're pretty close to the road, some of them. And so what might be suitable for a highway in the States or somewhere else, it may just have different dimensions here. And if we're thinking about the tourists, most of them are going to be on foot. So I don't know if that's different being on foot, because it's actually most of us locals that are in the cars. And so I also was thinking, this is proposing 2 signs per property, possibly multiple sides. For the driver driving through these tourist areas, that might be a whole lot of just animation and things going on for a driver. So just having some professional weigh in with some analysis on these types of signs for both foot traffic and vehicle traffic, I think would really provide us a lot of information. So that would help us understand safety issues. It would help us understand the size, the proximity to road, those sort of considerations that I know you did a lot of research on. So I just want to make sure that all of that research is providing us all the information we really need before we make this decision and we finalize those sizes and other calculations. One way that has been used on Guam to determine the percentage of allowable signage has been based on the percentage of the building facade. Now, I don't know that that's necessarily helpful here. The more pertinent issue might be the proximity to the road and whether it's for foot traffic and vehicular traffic. So that covers the sign and the types of signs. And if data supports the change in signage, I would recommend that we start off with 1 sign per property with 1 side. Again, there's so much of the built environment in some of those districts. If we allow 2 and them to be multifaceted, it may be a drastic change. And so I think if we do it progressively, a step at a time, that if everything's saying that the tourists want this, they find it inviting, it would still allow them to be attracted to our island destination, that we start off with 1 sign, see how it goes, and then build from there, rather than everything's up, and it's always harder to go backwards to remove something if we find out that it's not conducive in any way. Then I feel like I sound like I'm so, really I'm trying to help straighten everything. But with the audio, again, I really caution thinking about that, and maybe that would be a second or a third phase to see how the signage is going, that maybe the audio later would be the additional consideration. I just think a lot of bright lights, a lot of animation, a lot of movement, a lot of signage and audio may just be a lot all at once, but we could think of it step by step. So my recommendation would be to not have that, but if it is to be considered, then maybe farther on down the road when we find that the signage is working and that it may be conducive for the next steps. Then I was really thinking about, if we think about all of the businesses that are there, I mean, the reality is, in a lot of ways, we're a family destination, but in those hotel and resort areas, we have a lot of adult shops, we have a lot of strip clubs, those sort of things. So I think that there need to be really strong guidelines for all of the businesses, because every business, who knows what they might be thinking is the way that they want to advertise themselves. So because there are those wide variety of perspectives about what is and isn't tasteful, what is and isn't family appropriate regarding visuals, light, motion, color changes, and the like, I think a really strong guideline needs to be set up so that once it's in place, like we all feel comfortable with it. And then I would also recommend that no signage should face the beach or otherwise be situated beachside or towards any residences. If they're beachside, again, this really changes the whole character of a natural environment. But beyond that, there is the potential for lighting that faces the ocean to disturb turtles, their nesting habits, those sort of things. So maybe that wasn't in anybody's plans, but I think maybe, or not maybe, I think we should make it clear in the bill to not have it there because it can disrupt marine life. And then towards residences, to not have any of that signage facing the residences because that lighting and animation may disrupt people in their homes. This actually happened unexpectedly in Humatic, from what I understand. When they painted the San Dionisio Church white, it was a brilliant white, and then all the neighbors had this glaring white in their houses. And so it was kind of a lesson learned about something that seems so everyday and mundane, how it can have a really big effect. And then if signage is allowed and the proposal to have public service announcements is a really excellent one. That's a real positive. But I think we would all be served well, yourself included, the businesses included, to have an understanding of what constitutes a public service announcement. Just again, so that all of our thoughts are in alignment with each other, and there isn't that potential for any misunderstandings. And then I have a couple of questions, and it may just be the wording, but again, it's an opportunity to strengthen or change that wording so it better meets your intentions. So in section 2, section F, number 3 on page 2, it says that individual digital signs shall not be calculated into the allowable signage. So is that saying that there would be the potential for 2 or more or many more digital signs per property then? Oops, let's see if I got my numbers right. So in the copy that I have on page 2, it says, individual digital signs shall not be included in calculations to determine the allowable signage area on a facade. So in your estimation, are you thinking that that would allow for more than 2 signs on a property? Was that how it was written? So,
yes, you can.
Yes.
State your name for the record.
Thank you. So we are recommending 4 or 5 changes, including not allowing digital signs on structures next to the beach, facing the beach. We are also, in Joanne's testimony, we have a definition of public service announcement that we'd like to include. With respect to individual digital signs not being included in the calculations, again, listening to feedback that we got the last couple of months, we are recommending an amendment whereby right now the law says you can have 10%, a maximum of 10% of your facade in signage. We are recommending that only 20%, no more than 20% of that 10% be digital, which speaks to your question, and no matter how big your facade is, you never get more than 165 square feet twice, no matter how big your facade. You take duty free, for example, it's 750 feet long and it's, let's say 35 feet tall. That 10% is like 3,500 square feet. Okay? Well, 10% of that would be 350 square feet. No, you can never do more than 165 twice, which speaks to your concern about how many are we going to see on a building. I hope that helps.
I forgot to mention that when you make when you're going to make a statement, please state your name because this is being recorded. And just state your name and go on with what you're going to have to say.
Okay. My name is Dan Swavely. Sorry.
And I even forgot to introduce myself. My name is Pedo Terlaje. I chair this committee. Thank you.
Sejus Baasi, Mr. Swavely, and it sounds like we're largely on the same page.
I think
so
we are.
That's very good. And then on page 5, it says that digital signs cannot be smaller than 40 square feet. And so I'm not sure I understand the objective there. And so if you could explain your intentions for that one?
This would be J, not smaller than 40 square feet?
Yes,
Is
the
that
J,
fine?
yeah.
So in Joanne's testimony, you'll see another amendment that we're suggesting, that it shows, we've described the reasoning as to why we thought at one point 40 square feet should be the minimum size because we didn't want a proliferation of signage, something you mentioned. But then, fact of the matter is, perhaps a minimum size is not necessary because it infringes on the creativity of some businesses down there. For example, some businesses would be a restaurant. They might want to have a digital menu. Or we have now standalone businesses which sell ice cream, coffee, even cigars. They might want to have a digital sign about that. Or there might be some creativity involved with having a smaller digital sign that complements larger static signages. So the suggestion we're making is that that was our reason for 40 square feet, but in fact, it's not a deal breaker, and if in the opinion of this body, maybe we shouldn't have any, it's not a problem, and any minimum, yeah.
And again, your feedback is very helpful. It lets us know that you've been thinking this through, you've been talking through with
Sure.
others, trying to assess all of these things in a very responsible way. And I like the answer. It was something I had not thought of, but I think is really informative. It's true. It may be creative in a certain way, but it may be meeting specific needs, such as menus and things like that, which I can see that could be a real value. So I think that's a very helpful answer. And so the last thing is, at least in the way that it's written at this point, what happens after the notice of violation by the Department of Public Works. So I think is that we can all, well, anyways, I think it would be helpful to have some further understanding so that after the notice of violation, what the next steps would be, because as is your intention, as I understand it in the bill, we don't want multiple signs that are not functioning or unattractive or not working properly there. So we as a community all benefit by making sure everybody's living up to having functioning, attractive signs.
May I answer that real quickly? So we intentionally put this in the purview of the building official because signs require a building permit. Anything that requires a building permit also requires a certificate of occupancy. And so the signage would go through that process. The notice of violation within the building code is a well-established process. We use it every day. Sometimes I'm the subject of it. And so there's inspectors go out, they will issue a notice of violation. You have a certain number of days in which to fix it. If you don't fix it within that time, they can remove your business license for that business. Yes, yeah. So we didn't want to invent a whole new process here. We thought let's just tie into a process that, frankly, works. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that answer. And again, it's very helpful to see the thought process and understand how that ties in. And so I think that will really help us as we further craft this bill. So thank you so very much for accommodating me. Like I said, it's very good to see that we're largely on the same page about thinking this through, making it work in the best way for the commercial businesses, but also the community. And thank you, everybody here, all the senators and the chair, for letting me go ahead of time. And then I shall now go to my next engagement, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Mars. Go ahead, Senator Mars. Thank you. Huh? First Lady, please. Go ahead. I'm going to allow the, the testimony of the speakers, and then I'll allow the senators to ask whatever question they need to ask. All right?
Great. Thank you, Senator. Half-day Speaker Munya Barnes, Senator Terlaje, and committee members, Senator Bisco Lee, Senator Tidegway, and Senator Therese Terlaje. I'm Joanne Camacho, Director, Market Development for DFS T Galleria in Tumon, and I appreciate this opportunity to speak on behalf of Bill 8635. DFS T Galleria has been the lead to modernize Guam's sign code for the H Resort Zone. Currently, the H Resort Zone on Guam does not have its own customized sign code, as do Guam's land use, such as R1 family, single family residential, R2 multifamily residential, C commercial, M1 light industrial, and M2 heavy industrial. Instead, signage in the H Resort Zone mirror the commercial zone signage code. Further, except for a few exceptions regarding political signs, school bus shelters, and recent off-premise electronic messaging sign, Guam's sign code is woefully outdated, particularly the prohibition of moving signage. Yes, there have been many flashing and moving signs in Guam, particularly in Tumon, but they are all illegal. Revamping Guam's entire sign code for the H Resort Zone is a large undertaking. And while a comprehensive code was prepared in 2016 and approved by the Guam Visitors Board of Directors, Bill 8635 addresses the first small but important step in bringing Guam's sign code into the 21st century. This first step would permit digital video signage in the H Resort Zone. The background of this bill recognizes that Guam competes with other U.S. and international tourist destinations such as Hawaii, Japan, Hong Kong, Korea, the Philippines, and Taiwan. Of course, Guam's primary tourism strength lies in its location, offering education about our unique Chamorro culture, our sun, sand, and surf. But when tourists patronize Tumon hotels, stores, and restaurants, they bring in an international expectation of advertising that relies on dramatic, high-resolution video signage. Bill 8635 capitalizes on the mode of modern signage while placing reasonable limits on sign size, sign brightness, and sign volume. Further, Bill 8635 restricts signs messaging on on-premise content, meaning advertising only on services and products sold within the premise to which the sign is affixed. This feature separates Bill 8635 signage from the recently authorized off-premise electronic signage signs located at popular intersections in Tumuning and Tumon, which advertises products, services, and events at other locations. During the course of discussion, this proposed legislation, with many of you and other government of Guam officials, as well as other partners in Guam's tourism industry, we learned of several improvements that could be made. In our continuing efforts to derive the best bill possible, therefore, we offer these amendments. 1, the definition of PSA, public service announcement, would be helpful. To that end, we recommend adding the following definition to Section 3H. For purpose of this subsection, Public service announcements are limited to factual information about the public health and safety topics and shall inform and educate, not sell a product or service. 2, we should take steps to avoid digital signage from being easily visible from Tumon Beach. To that end, we recommend adding this new clause to Section 3. P, digital video signage authorized by this bill shall not be placed on any building wall along Tumon Beach that totally faces the ocean. That addresses also Senator Kelly's Titano's concern. 3, setting a height to width ratio of not to exceed 2.5 may deny some creativity for digital signage. We recommend that ratio because it's commonly accepted in an architecturally pleasing proportion, and it would prohibit long, narrow banners style signage. Nonetheless, a more liberal ratio could be set or no ratio whatsoever. 4, setting the minimum area of digital signage at 40 square feet may hinder smaller businesses at the H Resort Zone from advertising small-scale messaging such as for menus, retail sales, or a limited variety such as for only coffee, ice cream, cigars, etc. And situations where digital video signage itself is more appropriate as only a minor adjunct to static signs. We recommend the minimum area of 40 square feet because it would prevent a proliferation of small digital signage throughout the H Resort Zone. Nonetheless, a similar minimum area could be set or no minimum area whatsoever. Similarly, setting the maximum area of a single digital video sign could be calculated as proportional to the area of the building facade, rather than a single maximum area of 165 square feet. The U.S. Sign Council recommends that buildings located within 0 to 100 feet from the public road be limited to all sign coverage at 15% of the area of the building facade, and Guam's sign code now limits that coverage to 10% of the building facade, absent a variance by GLUC. Regardless of a building location, but the U.S. Sign Council does not distinguish between dynamic digital video signage and static signage. Since some buildings along Poly San Victorias are quite long and tall, we recommend a maximum sign of 2 digital signs at 165 square feet, each as a practical limit, regardless of the building's overall facade area. Applying the U.S. Council's recommendation of 50% coverage, for example, at T Galleria, which is approximately 750 feet long and 30 feet tall, would qualify for 3,375 square feet of all signage, without distinction to either dynamic, digital, video, or static signage. In addition to setting the maximum area for a single digital video sign at 165 square feet, we now see merit to further limiting digital signage to a maximum area in proportion to the building's facade. While such calculations are inherently subjective in nature, we recommend that all digital video signage cannot exceed 20% of the building's legal allowable coverage for all signage, with a maximum of 2 signs at 165 square feet of each. I am accompanied this afternoon by Mr. Dan Swaley, who assisted DFS in preparing a draft version of this bill. Together, we hope to answer the committee's question and respond to your comments. Thank you, and Suzu Mahasi.
Thank you very much, First Lady. Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, Senators. My name is Christopher Morato, and on behalf of my family, my partners, and our company, TriVision Media Group, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to testify before you this afternoon in support of Bill 86-35 with certain amendments. TriVision Media Group is an outdoor advertising company that owns and operates the electronic displays at the Camacho property in front of the Coast 360 Bank in Tamuning and the electronic displays at the Pacific Bay Hotel in Tumon. To be very clear, our displays are for off-premise advertising only and will not be affected by this particular bill. I'd like to start by thanking and applauding the efforts of Madam Speaker and her staff for taking on the challenge of revamping and modernizing our current sign laws to account for on-premise electronic digital advertising signs. Our company, TriVision, as a member of the outdoor advertising industry here on Guam for over 15 years now, does support the intent of this bill with a few amendments. At this time, I'd like to just quickly state three of the recommendations that we have made, and it's already been stated with the previous speaker's recommendations. So in regards to the size, the legislation on page 1, line 10, it states the legislation also focuses on exterior on-premise signage to avoid an overly abundant degree of signage in our tourism industry. We wholly agree with that statement. Guam's #1 industry is our tourism, and our tourists come to our island for the beauty of our island, not necessarily signage or anything like that. So we're very concerned in regards to that aspect. So as the bill is written now, it is allowed for 165 square foot signs, which would then now open the floodgates to every piece of property and every building in Tumon the right to build these 2 signs, no matter the size of the building. And with the recommendations that the previous speaker had recommended, that would solve that issue. Just to make that clear and stated on the record here, our current sign law now allows for 10% of the facade's space to be used for any type of sign. Now, unfortunately, this sign law was written decades and decades ago, and was not, and digital signs that we have today, which are getting more affordable and the technology is getting better, is not accounted for in that current law. And that's why we support this bill, so that we can bring our economy and our sign industry into the 20th century with digital signs. So our current law now states that we can have 10% of the facade for any type of signs, which are not including digital. This bill, with the recommendation that the previous speaker had mentioned, would allow for that 10% to be broken down. So only 20% of the allowable 10% will now be allowed to be digital. So in essence, only 2% of a building's facade would be allowed used by digital signs, just to make that very, very clear. And that particular amendment we support wholly, because that would restrict these signs based on the size of the facade of each building, instead of just liberally opening it up for every building to put up 2 large digital displays. Number 2 would be the ratio. Also, the previous speaker had mentioned an amendment to that. The reason why we disagree with that ratio is that it prohibits property owners from aesthetic design elements of individual signs, such as circle signs that might fit in the design and aesthetics of their products and logos. So removing the ratio would then allow business owners and property owners to create their signs based on the message that they would like to put out to the public. And that is part of our constitutional right of free speech. So we are in full support of that amendment as well. Number 3 is the minimum size of the signs, which again, the previous speaker had mentioned an amendment and recommended amendment for. We find with our research and experience with working with these signs that there have been no minimum levels set aside for these signs. So we don't believe that that should be implemented here on Guam as well. And the argument stands that, just like the previous speaker said, certain signs are very conducive to communicating menus, certain items that other businesses may want to do outside of the door of their establishments. Now, those were the three key points that we wanted to bring up, and that has already been addressed by the previous speaker. But as we're sitting here and I'm listening to the senator's comments in regards to penalties and enforcements, I just want to make a quick statement in regards to that. The penalties and the enforcement of the current sign laws here on Guam, in our opinion, are lacking. They were created many, many years ago. So obviously the amounts and the sums that are penalized to companies that break the law are very, very minimal. Almost so minimal that a company would be willing to just pay the penalties every month in order to break that law. So one of our recommendations would be to perhaps take a look at those penalties and the enforcement, so that to make it more strict and have more teeth onto it, so that it really does penalize people that break the law. At this point, when we've tried to work with public work, and one of the solutions to that could be, if you were to increase penalties, that type of fundage could go to public works to fund enforcement. Currently in Tumon, there are many, 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 many signs that are actually outside of our current law. It's just that it's not being enforced. So if we can revamp the penalties in regards to the current law, we can fund public works to actually enforce them, and that would actually clean up Tumon's sign problem. And allowing smaller digital signs, again, 2% of the facade, not 10 or 15, but 2% being digital, would then, in conjunction with enforcing the law, will then actually clean up Tumon. And that's why we are really in support of this bill, to bring our island to the 20th century so that we can use digital displays, but also limit it to protect the beauty of our island. So having said that, I thank you for your time, senators, and your effort, Madam Speaker. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Hafaday, my name is Bobby Sachdev from Trivision Media Group as well. Hafaday Senators, hopefully everybody had a great weekend. I wanted to applaud the speaker's efforts and our staff, along with the stakeholders of this bill. I agree 100% with my business partner of Trivision Media, Christopher Morato, and also stand in support of this bill with the amendments as stated. I want to make one comment, if I may, that the bill has thoroughly looked into the USSC sign codes and has studied and implemented, if not all, of the safety factors indicated in the USSC sign code. Having done that, I do applaud all their work that they've done, and again is in full support of this bill with amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We're going to start with Senator Lee with whatever questions she wants to ask.
Sujus Masi, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all of our stakeholders also for joining us today and giving us a little bit more clarity on this measure. One of the main issues that always comes up when we talk about our signage laws and what's currently on the books, and we know that a lot of those are very outdated and don't really take into consideration what's available now. In addition to all of those things, I think for me, especially when discussing these bills on the floor, safety has always been paramount. And I'm really glad that Bobby had mentioned the U.S. Sign Council because they have very specific recommendations as to the size and the lumens that you should use for the brightness. And this is all, it goes back to a lot of scientific research and data that they've done in terms of how many lanes on a certain highway and, distracted driving and things like that. So I really appreciate that a lot of those recommendations were taken directly from the sign code. I think they have like a book or they have a website, I know, and then there are just a bunch of different recommendations that are listed. But one of the questions that I had is on page 4, line 10 of the bill with regard to audio capability. And I'm concerned, I know that, we have a mix of people that will be viewing these signs. We know that we have pedestrians and then also motorists on our roadway. And so I just wanted to get a better idea of what the decibels would be, if you have an example of what that is.
Yes, I do, Senator. The normal conversation is generally measured at 60 decibels, like now. Something that is closest to 75, the only reference I could find, little domestic, but it's a vacuum cleaner. That's
Vacuum cleaner.
That's 75. Yeah, so this sign would set 75 decibels as the maximum
Okay.
decibels.
Yeah, I guess my concern would just be, I was concerned that I wasn't aware of what 75 decibels would be and if it would be loud enough to distract somebody from the honk of a car and those types of things. So 75 doesn't seem that loud. If you're saying that 60 is about
60 is normal conversation,
Normal
75 would
conversation.
be a vacuum cleaner. And these things can, of course, be measured, and they would be measured from a point where tourists would be walking past the sign. They wouldn't measure it right next to the sign face, of course, but some reasonable distance where it would be heard by.
Thank you, Mr. Swavely. I also had a question about, in terms of safety concerns, just the potential for these changes to be expanded outside of the H resort zone. I know that it would probably take an additional bill, but there are concerns with folks in the community that these changes could potentially be expanded to other commercial zones and, all across our island. And so I know that that's something, this is a kind of a small carve out. So do you have any recommendations in terms of those concerns, or how would you attempt to address
Yes,
those?
that would be a concern of mine, actually, because in almost every community, sign codes are specific to zones, as they are in our community here, except we don't have one for the H Resort Zone. So if you look at even the United States Sign Council model sign code, it is according to different land use zones, and everyone is different. Not big differences necessarily between a single family or for instance, between light industrial and a heavy industrial, but there are some differences. So I would think that we need to address each of our zones with a slightly specific, customized sign code.
Thank you. I'm also concerned that there's the possibility that every single building in Tumon could be open to these displays. And so that's just a lot coming at you in a very small area.
There is. Every property owner will have the opportunity to implement a sign code like this, which will allow him to take 20% of his allowable coverage and put it into digital signages. That doesn't mean everyone will do it, of course. They are expensive.
Right.
They take electricity, they take more maintenance. They're more susceptible to vandalism than our static signs. But if the question is, could we have 20% of every building facade? It's possible. But even now we have a law that says you can have up to 10%, but we don't have that.
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I very much appreciate the feedback that you've given the committee and the amendments that you proposed. I think those are really helpful, and they help to address some of my initial concerns, as well as I think the ones that Senator Titano had raised. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming down here and helping to inform us on this measure, Sujos Masi. And thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Lee. Senator Terlaje, do you have something?
All right, if I could just clarify, I don't have the code in front of me, but, so in the testimony, it was said that sign code, Guam sign code now limits that coverage to 10% of a building's facade, but you just said 20% of the what?
The sign code allows, without a GLUC variance, sign code allows 10% of the
10% of
facade
a facade.
to be covered with signage. We are recommending that of that 10%,
20
a
is electric.
maximum of 20%, with then a maximum of no more than 165 square feet,
Yes.
regardless of what that 20%.
Could you describe the 165 square feet using this building or this room we're in?
It's like 8 by 20. Okay, 8 by 20. So,
Okay.
person is 6 feet high, 2 feet higher. 20 feet would be probably the length of this building, the length of this table.
All right. And just on one of the amendments, the one regarding facing the beach or the ocean, and so it says it should not be placed on any building wall along Tumon Beach that totally faces the ocean.
Yes.
I'm just thinking they all kind of are angled, but what would that be then? How would you define that?
I struggled with this myself, actually. You can see, first of all, it concerns only structures along the beach. Yes.
Right. I think we're trying-
not the second structure line in next to Poly Salvatore's or even across. Only those along the beach. And then when you walk down there, usually there is one wall which is parallel to the beach. That's the wall I'm trying to grab with this definition here, and not side walls.
All right. Well, I think we're trying to, well, the concern that I had heard earlier, that we're trying to prevent light shining to the ocean, right? Any unnecessarily because of the, yes.
Actually, that was Senator
Animal life.
Kelly's.
Correct.
About light. I never thought about that.
Oh, I
because,
see.
I mean, first of all, we have a setback of 10 meters from the mean high water mark
Yeah.
for any wall or any building anyway, and the buildings are generally far behind that. And you'll see that the lumens are further restricted within these
Right.
digital signs. So I never thought about light shining in the ocean as an issue.
I think this concern arose because some of the lights on the building, just lights, not signs themselves, are affecting the
Now,
wildlife.
yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, just
And so
exterior
they want to
lighting,
prevent
yeah.
any further, yes, disturbance. Okay. I'm trying to figure out, but I'm just guessing that the minimum, you said you're changing that recommendation now, the minimum, that we can remove that minimum, and but it was intended to prevent a proliferation of small signs. But I guess as you pointed out, right now there's no limit to how many signs can be put on a building. I mean there's a limit, but there's no minimum. So technically, we would be in the same situation where every building could have a sign as small as they want, I guess, something like that. Is what was I going to ask? Are you also the Trivision group? Are you also in favor of audio? Can we remove the audio?
Thank you for your question, Senator. At this point, we are not in favor of audio. We base our opinion on the safety studies, visibility studies. That's our business. So we're very familiar with the USSC sign code and the sign model that was released in 2011. And that sign model was based on safety standards and visibility and all of those things. And nowhere in the code does it say that it's allowable for audio. So in our experience and our research, We haven't seen anything that allows for or has studied audio in regards to these digital signs, and therefore, we really can't be in support of that part of the bill.
Okay. I'm also glad for the recommended changes that I've heard today, because I support most of those. I think just one last question is, not this. Oh, the digital signage may be multiple-faced signs containing 2 or more faces. What would be a face of a sign?
Yes, this came from the sign code, the model sign
Okay.
code, and my interpretation is that you could have a sign that is not flat. You could have a two-dimensional faces, that you would have something here, you would have something here, and you'd have something behind it, and then maybe another. That's just multiple faces. The face is generally the monitor screen that you're looking at.
Right.
Yeah.
And I thought that this bill kind of limited it to kind of flat along the face of the wall, the
No more than
facade of the
18
building.
inches. No more than 18 inches.
Okay,
Yeah.
or in like a window.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Terlaje. Go ahead, Senator Taitagui.
Your favorite senator, right, Mr. Chair? Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity, and I thank the panel who's here today and all the work that you put into making this bill a better bill. I'm glad to see there were amendments made as well, and actually, if there's any person who knows about signs, it's Mr. Swavely here, Dan, and I've worked with you when I was on the destination management team at GVB, and one of the concerns that we spoke about was signage and what we needed to do, and to provide actually to the legislature at that time, legislation which I actually have already, based on our conversations at GVB. I have something that I prepared already for introduction to address that issue with sign. But of course, I won't do it without the help of the stakeholders before introducing it. But it's already on the MIGs. Mr. Swavely, I appreciate the work that you're doing here with regards to some concerns that we have. And so my biggest concern, really, I think, like all of us here, is the fact that you can put this many signs up, from one building to another building, and it almost becomes saturated down in Tumon, and that's my concern. So if there was anything that we could do in this legislation to limit these signs from being everywhere, do you have any suggestions at all with regards to that, to limiting?
I do not, Senator. I mean, with a fair application of property rights, I just don't see how you can say one property can have a sign and another one cannot.
So my next question goes to you, Joanne. You're here. You mentioned you work for DFS, and there are signs that are currently on the building at DFS now that probably exceeds the size that's recommended by law. But I've heard that in the past, this was actually approved by the Guam Land Use Commission with a variance change. With that process, can you kind of explain how your signs were able to be sitting up on a DFS building, that large signs, and how you were able to go through, or Dan can, because Dan,
May I?
Yeah.
Thank you. I was the consultant for DFS and for Comet and for Tumon Sands Plaza for their sign variances. Sign variance is a GLUC application. It has a form. It's the same application, actually, that you use for a variance in parking or density or height. Yeah? And so it's a formal application. You submit a pre-app. You get feedback from the chief planner and planning staff. Then you submit your 34 copies. Then you have an application review committee. which addresses the application, made up of 12 to 14 GovGuam agencies. That requires follow-up back and forth with them. Then we have a public hearing in the village in which the application is heard. And then after that, we go to the Municipal Planning Council, and we present it again. And then lastly, we go before the Guam Land Use Commission in another public hearing, at which time they hear the case planner's position statement, which summarizes the application review committee position statements, the Municipal Planning Council, and the public hearing.
Okay. And how long are these variance changes, how do I say it? How long is the, are you allowed to have these signs up? Is there a time limit, an expiration? Are you given 3 years,
Right.
2 years?
No, variances are not conditional uses. Upon, like a conditional use, they could put a time limit on it. Variances are forever. For instance, we couldn't give a building height variance and then say it's not good in 10 years, right? What are you going to do with the 5 stories that are you just got a variance for? Variances are good forever. They run with the property. We say they run with the property.
Oh,
and
okay.
the application itself takes about 8 to 10 months to process.
But Dan, this kind of scrutiny, I mean, going from the ARC to a public hearing to, next to the Guam Land Use Commission, this is good scrutiny, though.
Well, I think so. The result of those 3 applications were that DFS has a variance, a 20% variance, meaning they can have 30% of their facade in signage. And both TSP and Comet received a 10% variance, meaning they can go to 20%
I see.
of their facade and signage.
Okay.
Those are the only 3 I'm familiar with.
Also, Dan, in the USSC rules and regulations, this would be a great, documentation to be able to guideline for the ARC or the Guam Land Use Commission in the event we move forward to just maintaining the status quo? And then do they use that as a guide, Guam Land Use Commission?
I did not use the U.S. Sign Council code for any of the 3 applications that I took.
Oh, I see.
I'm not sure that, this was years and years ago. I'm not really sure it was really in effect. However, I would be quick to add that if you followed literally the U.S. Sign Council's recommendations, a building in a land use district like we have in Tumon, like an H resort zone, the Sign Council doesn't have an H resort zone. They have other, but if you put it together, they're recommending 15% coverage, not our 10%.
Oh, that's interesting.
A
I didn't
building
realize
0
that.
to 100 feet away from the edge of a property line in a land use zone like our Tumon,
Right.
Sign Council would give them 15% coverage.
So in the USSC, it does not have this hotel
No, they
persona
don't.
in there.
But they
that would
have they have like an urban core, high-dense commercial,
I see.
25 mile per hour that fits,
Right.
high pedestrian traffic. It's pretty much the same.
What about Maui's, they have rules and regulations. They're very strict and keeping, the island pristine and as such. And Maui has a group of regulations for signs. I remember we talked about this
Yes.
at Guam Visitors Bureau. Have you looked into that and incorporated any of those suggestions?
I have not. I remember looking into that, and I just
Right.
found them to be really complicated and burdensome, and would I think, create a whole new layer of ambivalence and who's getting what, and go left, go right, go up, go down. So I walked away from it.
Okay. The only thing I have actually is, are there any signs other than DFS signs or those that received variances that actually are the same size as 165 that was recommended in here that are up in Tumon currently?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. We just considered that to be a reasonable 8 by 20 foot, and
Nothing,
I'm
don't
not
have any
sure
right now?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I greatly appreciate it. And having you here, Dan, is your wealth of knowledge, and totally respect the work that you do. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Go ahead, Senator Terlaje.
Thank you. I just want to clarify a couple of things. So, for TriVision, what types of sign violations have you been reporting to DPW in regards to Tumon? Is that relative to Tumon? Or that you notice?
You know, I can't really recall the details in regards to the sign violations that we've put out, but it's very clear. If you went down to Tumon or anywhere in our community, 10%, because the way the law is written is, signs are allowed for 10% of the wall on which it's mounted. So it's not necessarily the facade, it's actually the wall on which it's mounted. So I'll use the ITC intersection, the ITC building as an example. They consider the wall on which it's mounted the entire building's facade, whereas the current law is actually the wall in which that billboard is mounted, which is 100% coverage of that wall. So that, in essence, is against the law. So if you go down to Tumon, you can see many, many signs like that that are just covering much more than 10% of the wall on which it's mounted. And that's the type of complaints that we've made to Public Works before.
How do the lumens allowed by this bill compare to the lumens that are allowed in the digital signs or electronic signs that you have put up in Tumon?
The lumens on this particular bill are in rhythm with the USSC sign code in regards to the brightness level. So we have no problem with the lumens levels of these signs, and that is a very important aspect. And just to clarify a little bit about digital signs are actually considered safer than regular signs. Now that is a shocking revelation to most people, including myself when I read that. But studies show that at night, digital signs are actually more legible than regular signs, and therefore safer. Because when a driver is driving, the studies that have been done consider the distraction level or how long it takes a driver driving at a certain speed to actually comprehend what's on the sign.
All right.
So digital signs, because of their illumination and their clarity, are easier to read and comprehend, and therefore safer.
How many variances did you get from the GLUC for digital signs? The one in Tumon, and you said the one at the Landmark building?
Yes, so two of them,
So
yes.
what are the lumens on those?
That is no greater than 3 candle foot lumens over the ambient lighting conditions. So this particular bill is stating the actual lumens, but what we were approved for, and again based on the USSC sign code, our technology actually has sensors and the technology to adjust our lumens based on ambient lighting. So even at night, if it's very, very, very dark, then our signs actually go below the lumens that are stating on this sign bill. So it really depends on the ambient lighting conditions. Even during the day, if a cloud was to go above our sign and the brightness levels go down, our brightness will also adjust.
So what would you say they run at night, average?
Well, the lumens, if I was, I'm just going to kind of wing it here, but the maximum lumens of our sign is 8,000 nits. So when it's absolutely dark at night, our displays drop to about 2% of that. So which is well below the 3 candle foot strength of ambient light conditions.
I'm trying to compare it to the 70-foot candles that this bill is going to allow. So if you could help me to...
Sure.
Are those digital signs running at 70 candle foot, or are they running at something like 10?
Oh, gosh. I'm not an expert, and I wouldn't be able to comment the specifics in regards to that, but we'd be more than willing to work on that and get you that answer
Yeah, I'd like to
in
know.
the near
So we
future.
can just compare?
Sure. We can get that information for you, and that is a very good question.
Thank
so
you.
we should answer that, yes.
All right. And then if you could just confirm, Mr. Swavely, the three exceptions were DFS, TSP. What's TSP?
Tumon Sands Plaza.
Oh, Tumon Sands. And what was
Tumon
the
Sands
third?
Plaza got a 10% variance, so they can have 20% and all, because they already get
10
10%.
plus 10?
Yep, 10 plus 10.
And DFS was 10 plus 10
Uh-huh,
also?
and Comet Building across the street from DFS, where the underwater world is, and
The plaza?
GameWorks used to be there, and
The plaza.
no, not the plaza. No, the plaza is an Israel building.
It's the outrigger, right?
Yeah, where the whale comes
Okay.
out. That's a better one.
Okay. And that also was at plus 10?
10 plus 10. That's right.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, Mr.
And
Chair.
may I also please just state that the lumens that we recommended come from the United States Sign Council code, as well as the decibels we recommended. That also comes out of the Sign Council. That's the basis of.
Thank you very much, Senator Terlaje. You mentioned the three key points, and I will look into your, the review, the statement that you make regarding the three key points, and also the kind of just thinking about the penalties and the enforcement. Maybe do you think we need to increase the penalties and maybe carry on a more frequent enforcement on some of these signs?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is our opinion. I believe that because the sign laws were written decades ago, the penalties associated to breaking the sign law is very, very minimal. So that is a twofold problem. Number one, it doesn't prohibit people from breaking the law because literally like off-premise sign companies like ours literally can build signs and just pay the penalties every month because it's worth it. We would make more money, tremendously more money than what we would have to pay in penalties, number one. Number two, those penalties and the funding that the government gets from those penalties are so minute that it won't even pay for the salary of one person that that is hired by the government to enforce the law. So that's why we've always recommended, even when we were working on our off-premise sign bill and our variants, we've always recommended more of a penalty for breaking that law in order to get more funding to enforce it, and then also to put more teeth into it so that people don't break the law consciously.
So the enforcement agency would be DPW, right?
Yes.
Okay, another thing that I wanted to bring up, is there any requirements in as far as the maximum force sustained winds that is required for depending on the size of the sign?
Well, yes.
The maximum force wind?
Yes. So every sign that is installed, or even whether it be freestanding sign with its own structure, or a sign that's put on the building, is susceptible to all building codes of Guam. So they do have to meet those strict building codes in regards to wind speeds, earthquakes, all the safety factors. So before you even install a sign, you have to get those permits from DPW.
So maybe depending on the type of sign, they give you the requirement of just, the maximum force that sign can withstand, right?
Oh, yes. That is all part of the building code that even sign companies building and installing signs have to abide by.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Senator.
I have one more question. With regards to PIC, when they put their banner down for that marathon, would you consider that illegal?
Yes, we would consider that illegal. That is more than In the current law,
Right.
that is more than 10% of the wall on which it's mounted.
Okay,
Yeah, so
Okay.
yes,
thank
we
you.
would
Thank
consider.
you.
Oh, and also, sorry, that is also an off-premise sign. The marathon
Right.
is not a tenant of PIC, and
Right.
therefore it's considered an off-premise sign, which is illegal in Guam.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Terlaje, do you have any? The Committee on Public Safety, Border Safety, Military and Veterans Affairs, Marriage Council, Infrastructure, and Public Transit has duly heard Bill number 8635, COR, and Act to add 61547 both to Article 5, Chapter 61, Title 21, Guam Code annotated relative to exterior on premises signage in hotel resort zone and defining digital signage. Let me just add that the written testimony can be submitted to my office. I don't want to put out the address because, you never find my office, and maybe the First Lady would know where's my office is at, but it's right after the post office. You see the Havazava coffee shop, almost right across Ban Pacific. My office is on top on the north side, and that's a better way of putting it out for everybody to find my office. Also, my email, you can send me on my email, Senator Pedo at senatorjpterlaje.com. Okay, so just for the record, my office is Brits Point Building, Suite 202, 140 Aspinall Avenue in Agana. But the first one that I gave you regarding my location is a lot better. You can find my office that way. This public hearing is now adjourned. The time now is 4:27.